Sea of Stars ended up becoming a kind of surprise hit for me, being a game that I hadn't heard of until close to the release, and then actually becoming one of my favorite games by the time of the year, by the time that it was all said and done. And it's a game that I've recommended to quite a few people, and a perfect representation of one of my favorite styles of gaming. And so, today's video, I'm going to be going over my thoughts on this game and why I think it's so great and why I think it is definitely something that should be on your radar. So, with that being said, guys, my name is Doug, and this is my review of Sea of Stars. So Sea of Stars is a love letter to classic RPGs such as Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy VI, that 16-bit era of JRPGs, and it definitely shows all the way throughout in just about every way possible. And so I thought that it was a really nice kind of throwback game, but also obviously has its own twists to the genre, and definitely was not trying to imitate any game that came before it, while also definitely having some inspirations, and I really enjoyed the balance that it struck with modern and classic. We'll kind of touch on this throughout. The reason I wanted to bring this up now is because that's something that it is a comparison that I hold throughout. And so, I suppose as usual, go ahead and start things off with the story as far as topics to the review here. So the general plot to the game follows your two main characters named Valir and Zale. They are the Solstice warriors set to protect the land from the evil of someone named the Fleshmancer. Not an intimidating name by any means, right? Just obviously is a pushover. And your journey, quite obviously, as you would expect, takes you on all sorts of twists and turns. You get to meet a pretty enjoyable cast of characters, which we'll touch on in a little bit. And you go to a lot of different really cool looking environments that I obviously can't show a whole lot of for the sake of the no spoilers in the review, but there is a lot of different areas in this game and a lot of good variety to it. Also something that will be touched on in the future. But yeah, throughout your journey you meet all these different characters, go on to all these different places, and for a story that starts off relatively wholesome, and I'd argue it's probably wholesome throughout, but it starts off pretty mundane and chill. It gets pretty wild throughout, and it takes a lot of really big twists and turns. There is multiple moments in this game that were some of the better plot twists in games that I can recall in recent memory. I wouldn't say they're up there with the likes of Modern Warfare 2's big reveal, but they're definitely some. It's not as straightforward as a story or as mundane of a story as someone could expect from a game like this. And so I was really happy with the story and the fact that it kind of keeps you on your toes throughout. And kind of speaking of, there is actually two endings to this game. So if you beat the game just as is, then you unlock the regular ending. However, there is when you beat the game, it creates a star next to your save, and so that lets you go back and play the game from right before the final mission. And then you can go back and you have to meet a bunch of requirements, such as finding all the collectibles and completing a set number of side quests. And then you unlock the true ending, which is very much worth your time, or at the very least, as much as I'd recommend playing it, I would at least recommend looking it up and seeing it for yourself in some way, shape, or form. Regardless, both endings are great, and I think that the overall experience here is absolutely worth playing and something that I was a huge fan of. The game was roughly, by the time that I beat it, I believe I beat it in just around 30 hours, and so I think that was a really good length, where it never really overstayed its welcome, but for the time that I was playing it, it was a game that I was constantly thinking about, constantly talking about, and just always wanting to come back and play. And then, yeah, it was kind of the perfect length for the game that it is, and so I thought that was really cool, because I feel like sometimes games can definitely get the length portioning wrong, for sure. Also worth mentioning here is, as I kind of touched on earlier, the characters, which this game has a really good cast of. The game not only has some good playable characters, but also a really well drawn out, or well fleshed out cast in general. So obviously not every character you meet in this game is playable, but I really enjoy the characters that are presented there. So obviously Valir and Zale are kind of the two main focus characters as they're on their journey to stop the Fleshmancer, and they're the Solstice Warriors. But along the way, you pick up 4 other companions, and I really enjoy the way that they're all fleshed out and their abilities blend together. And which I'll talk on the abilities piece later in the gameplay section of the video. But I really liked the cast of characters. They're a very lovable group. You grow to care about them a lot by the end of the game. They're very well written, and yeah, I don't really have a whole lot to say on that front. I did just want to acknowledge the fact that I thought that this game has a pretty memorable cast of characters, and they're people that I'll remember for a long time to come. Moving on to kind of the other big portion, though, of the review would be the gameplay, because what is a game without good gameplay? And so, as I mentioned, Sea of Stars is kind of a love letter homage to old 16-bit RPGs, and likewise, so is the gameplay. So, in general, the gameplay kind of takes the turn-based approach that you could expect from the games that it is drawing its inspiration from, but it also has its own twist on it. So, when you're in combat, a lot of the time enemies will have an icon appear above their head. And that could be either a moon, it could be a hammer, it could be a sword. And the point is that certain characters have different weapons and abilities. Valir draws her power from the moon. Zale draws his power from the sun. And those attacks can do both extra damage to the enemies, but also can stagger the enemy and stop them from doing their next attack. Likewise, every character, and this goes for the enemies, has a kind of their own special abilities, and so you kind of use those to counter each other, and it adds a really good strategic element to the game. I don't know how well I'm explaining this right now, but hopefully what I'm trying to say makes sense. For example, in the clip playing in the background right now, the enemy on the left has a moon and 2 swords, meaning they will be attacking in 1 turn now, because it has that little clock right there. And so what that means is that they're going to use an ability here shortly. Had I hit them with 2 sword attacks and a moon attack, or some variation that got that status effect on them, it would have stopped them from using that attack, and I didn't do it in this situation. And so again, it adds a really nice strategic element to the game. It keeps you paying attention. It was something that I really enjoyed. It was kind of a unique spin on the idea. And, I mean, it's definitely, like, I don't want to say simple gameplay, but it's definitely not the most intricate gameplay system in the world. I just really think it works because it's simple, it's fun, and it does more than most games like it would, and I thought that was really cool. On top of that, you do have the world. So in general, the game is, I think the game would count as open world for the most part. We have to get a little far into the game to kind of get there, but you are able to explore this really awesome world and its world map, and in general, the world map is kind of, you're walking around top-down style, and then when you go to different areas, it starts to become, obviously there's different areas on the map you can go to, and then those areas are kind of more fleshed out when you enter them, and they connect and all that. The world itself is really cool. You got a bunch of islands connected by water, and each island kind of has different aesthetics. So the first island of the game, it's kind of the starting island. It's more magic themed because that's where all the Solstice Warriors are from. There's another island with a really heavy undead theme. Then there's areas that aren't islands per se, but there's like an underwater area or a lot of mountain areas. There's quite a few of those. And I really enjoyed the world and exploring it, and for the most part, it was a really enjoyable experience kind of going around and figuring everything out and checking out what all this game had to offer as far as exploration goes. Something I also really enjoyed about this game, I don't know if this is the right word or term to refer to it, but they have kind of some gameplay augmentations or like different kind of enhancers we'll go with. Again, this is definitely not what it's called in-game. And so, like, for example, one of them that you get early on makes it so that you get double your stats. It makes the game a little easier for you. Or there's one that makes it so you auto-heal after battles, or I don't know the other ones, to be honest with you. I just remember those two. And I thought that this was really good because it makes the game more accessible. It makes the game as easy or difficult as you want to make it, should you find these. And I thought that it was really nice that they gave that option. If you've played the game and are watching my gameplay, then it's pretty obvious that I actually used these. But I thought that it was just really good to kind of have them as an option. And I used them sometimes, I didn't use them sometimes. Sometimes I didn't feel like grinding a whole lot, so I'd boost myself. Sometimes it was whatever, I'll just play it legit. Honestly, I just really like that that's an option, and I think that obviously I'm somebody that believes you can play games however you want to play them. You're playing games to have fun, and so I think that a game that could be naturally a little bit challenging, offering a way to make things easier while not making things easy, is definitely something that I appreciate and respect them doing. And then I also wanted to touch on, for the last part of the gameplay section, the bosses, which there is a lot of. Pretty much every area in this game has a boss at the end of it, which, as you can imagine, usually plays pretty heavily on the augmentation system. And there was just some really cool designs all throughout, especially with some of the side quest bosses that you can find, like the late game secret bosses are obviously a bit more extra and fleshed out, but even then, there's just some really cool bosses throughout. So one of the main boss types are called the Dwellers, which are kind of the main enemies that the Fleshmancer leaves behind, and those fights always showed out as far as how cool they were and what they had to offer. And I just, off the top of my head, I'm sure there was a boss in the game that wasn't fantastic, but I honestly can't think of any in comparison to the ones that I enjoyed more. Moving on from gameplay, though, we're going to go ahead and talk about graphics. And obviously this game features some kind of retro-styled graphics, but with a modern twist, and I love these graphics, flat out. This is, in its own unique art-style-y way, a really beautiful game, and I think that the visuals is definitely a big draw for me, and one of my standout favorite parts of the game in general. So a huge shout out to everybody that worked on this game, and just how kind of borderline simplistic but also detail oriented in the same way. It's the graphics are just really cool, and I loved the art style and the kind of retro feel that this game had, is my point. Same kind of goes with the audio. So the audio in this game, the music throughout, is really phenomenal and top-notch, and kind of spoiler alert, but not really, there is a really good reason for that. So one of the people that worked on the soundtrack for this game is the man who worked on the soundtrack for Chrono Trigger, which is absolutely one of the games that this game draws some inspiration from. And I thought that that was so cool that they were able to get him to come work on it, and it also shows in the quality of the music. Obviously, he didn't work on every song, and I want to give credit where credit's due to everybody involved. Audio in this game was top-notch, really fits the vibe, really kind of helps get you immersed in the world that you're in. And then finally, there is actually sort of a sequel to this game. So before this game came out, the studio behind it had made a game called The Messenger, which is actually a pseudo-sequel. These games are very loosely connected outside of a few references, but they are in the same universe, and so while they're both very different games, if it's a world that you're interested in and want to see where it goes in the future, there is an option there. They're also releasing a DLC for this game at some point as well, I saw, so there is more to play, and trust me, there is a lot here in this package as well to begin with. It's not a perfect game by any means, but I think in general that it's a game that does a lot of things right, if not doing everything perfectly, if that makes sense. Nothing stands out as bad. There's a lot of things that it does really well. There's just a lot of things that it does well that maybe could have been a little better, but it's still a really great game, obviously. I don't really think I have anything particularly bad to say about it, and it really shouldn't be much of a surprise. I'm going to go ahead and give this game a score of a 9 out of 10. Once again, one of those cases where I couldn't really tell you anything bad about it, but at the same time, I just can't really, doesn't feel like it deserves a higher score than that, per se. And so with that being said, guys, thank you as always for watching today's video. If you're interested in more of my thoughts on different games that I play and other videos like that, a subscription is always appreciated if you're new here. And if you enjoyed today's video, why not drop a like? And if you've played Sea of Stars, feel free to sound off in the comments your thoughts on this game, because this is one of those games that I love to talk about, and is absolutely, like I said, one of the kind of standout surprise games of this year for me, and a game that I love to recommend. So, with that being said, thanks again, and as always for watching, and I will hopefully see you guys back in the next video. Bye, guys.